Welcome to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. The podcast that covers all things about humans, technology, and particularly the bit in between.
Welcome to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. The podcast that covers all things about humans, technology, and particularly the bit in between. With your host, Barry Kirby.
And welcome to this episode of 1202, the Human Factors Podcast with me, Barry Kirby. What I really love about the Human Factors community and the Human Factors projects we get into is really we can get into almost anything that you can possibly think of. Because humans are almost involved in pretty much anything to do with technology or any sort of activities, then we've got an excuse to stick our nose in. However, I've got to admit, I did meet a gentleman a number of years ago, we think it's probably about 5 now, at the Ergonomics and Human Factors Conference, and we sat having lunch, and he was busy telling me that he's going to get involved, Human Factors involved into the sport or the activity of diving, and that is the diving in the sea, not the diving off the board that you see at the Olympics. And I've got to admit that at the time I was like, that's great, that sounds like something that's a good byline as a hobby or something like that, but is that just too niche to be able to push as a mainstream Human Factors activity? Well, I'm really pleased to say that I was absolutely wrong, and I'm really pleased to welcome Gareth Locke, who's going to talk to us today about the work that he's doing in diving, but also to sort of promote the conferences running at the end of the month. So, Gareth, welcome.
Thank you very much for the invite. And yes, you talk about a niche of a niche of a niche. That's what I do. It's and it's applicable. There's, I'm sure we're going to cover it, but yes, Human Factors touches everything that goes on in the sport of diving. We'll come on to the details.
Absolutely. So
it's so big.
Before we get into the diving aspect, let's talk about what you're doing at the moment. So you're now running your own consultancy. Do you want to tell us a bit about it, about what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I suppose January 16 is when I started. It was called the Human Factors Academy at that time, and then became the Human Diver after that. And the idea really was to bring non-technical skills, psychological safety, and just culture training into the diving industry. My background was 25 years in the Royal Air Force, and I left in February 15, having done a whole plethora of jobs that were systems based. I was aircrew, I was a systems engineer, requirements manager, did a master's in aerospace systems. And near the end of my Air Force career, I got involved in diving. And I realized there was just this huge gap in terms of incident reporting, just culture, and how do you develop these sort of I knew it as crew resource management. Yeah. And I started in the oil and gas sector, and then the bottom fell out that market. And it's like, right, I want to do something in the diving industry. And it's been a long journey. But over that 5.5 years that I've been doing this, I've trained probably about 400 people face-to-face, probably about 2,000 people in online training. I wrote a book a couple of years ago, which has sold about 4,000 copies. I put a documentary together called If Only, which was inspired by Martin Bromley's Just a Routine Operation, and as a way of showing the complexity of what's going on. And I've now trained up 9 instructors to deliver non-technical skills training to divers. And as you sort of touched on, I'm putting a conference together at the end of this month to basically bring it all together.
Well, I mean, that's just so inspirational, the way that you've basically almost forced yourself into this area that is so important. But I know I've had family members who were into diving and things, and I did look at some of the things and think, wow, this just needs grip. This is just something that scares the living daylights out of me, because just the lack of, anything human factors involved, it just seemed a bit crazy. But we'll get into the actual human factors of diving in a moment. What was the original inspiration in terms of getting involved in human factors then? Because you obviously you've had that forces background, you've come in through that, but there must have been something that said to you, actually, I want to continue down this vein rather than do anything, follow the other engineering elements that you alluded to.
Yeah, I think the issue was probably about dive 9. I was on my master's degree out in the States, and we went diving for the weekend. And on the first day, I had a guide with me, and we stayed within all the limits. And the second day, I managed to blag my way onto a dive that I really shouldn't have been on.
Okay.
Some of the equipment went wrong, and I was, lucky. I was in control. I wasn't stressed, so I managed to recover the situation. We were on a 30-meter dive where I shouldn't have been, and I got back to the UK and went, you know what? I really want to get involved in diving. I want to do some more. And it was at that stage that I was starting to do other military work that involved human factors, and I was doing more and more digging about human factors analysis and classification system. And I wrote a bit of a white paper for the diving industry, which unfortunately managed to burn quite a few bridges in the process, because what I did was I took the existing incident reporting systems that exist in diving and compared them to something like HVACs. And I wrote this, and it wasn't pretty. And because people have been doing this for many years, obviously people get defensive and protectionist over what they're doing. Now, some of the organizations that are involved recognize the value of what I was trying to do. So I said, right, what I'm going to do, I'll go to Cranfield, because Cranfield had just published a report looking at a specific piece of diving equipment called a rebreather, looking at normal and contingent operations with rebreathers. So I went there to start a PhD to validate and show that what I was doing was genuine. The difficulty was that there's no data, and the industry didn't particularly want me to do this, because the way it's set up is risk is transferred at the lowest levels possible. So I stayed in that PhD for about 5 years, 6 years, and then knocked it on the head, because I wasn't getting anywhere. I was spending a lot of money. I wasn't getting the support that I thought I would get as part of as a PhD grad intern. And I was getting very demoralized with how academia works. At the same sort of time, I started to deliver some training, and I found a computer-based simulation called Jemison, which was designed by aviation psychologists to create an uncertain, stressful environment and to teach non-technical skills. And I used that as the jumping off board to say, right, because people are never going to sit in a classroom. There's no motivation, there's no requirement for doing that. But if I can make it fun, then, people can then start taking this knowledge they've learned in the classroom and applying it to diving. So that was probably the big step off, was the fact that I've got a tool, I can use it. And I had some people who trusted me for the first couple of pilot classes. And pretty much everybody went, wow, this is great, learned loads, have no idea how you're going to market this. It is such a different thing to how the diving industry works, which is very much about technical skill acquisition, and it's marketed as a fun sport that's accessible to everybody. And the risk is often downplayed, and speaking to colleagues, just talking about the margins that we have in the diving industry, those margins between what you do and where the failure points are not really discussed. And there isn't a culture that allows learning to happen. So there isn't a just culture. It's changed, I would say, in the last 10 years because of the efforts of people like myself and others who basically saying, look, what's the local rationality? How did it make sense for somebody to do what they did? Oh, they were just stupid. It was obvious it was going to end up as like that.
Yeah.
No, it's not. And I then started to get into conference presentations. I mean, the first conference I went to, I had 5 people in front of me, and 2 of those were my friends. And it was just like, oh man, this is quite hard. But then people start to realize, oh, actually, there is some value in this. And I purposely, when I go in to teach or present about human factors in diving, I don't start with the diving problems and issues they face. I talk about driving or forgetting your keys or picking the wrong yogurt out the fridge, or, all of the things that talk about human performance variability, and then get them to recognize that, yes, that's there. And then you segue into a diving example, and they go, oh, all right, so that's why I keep making these mistakes, or why the selection's wrong, or why I'm not monitoring my time or my gas and things like that. So it was a long journey, I would say, and it's been quite hard to be motivating at times. But what keeps me motivated is where people go, and the light bulb moments that come on, and people come to me and say, I can't stop seeing this now. You've exposed me to looking through a lens of human factors and systems thinking, and I now look at things very differently. I hate you for it. It's like,
Brilliant. Right. Well, on the just before we dive into the see what I did there, dive into the topic. Obviously, we've had this little thing called COVID-19 for about 18 months now. How have you found it? How have you coped with having to work? Have you had no work? Have you been super busy? Or
it's seriously changed. So I spent a lot of my time traveling around the globe delivering this human factors training to divers. And in fact, when COVID kicked off in March last year, I was going to be out working with NOAA in Seattle. And in fact, I was in Minneapolis teaching a paramedic team, an Aeromed paramedic team about non-technical skills. And it was just like, right, I've got to go. So I cut my course short a day because I thought the UK was going to go into lockdown. Yeah. Little did I know that wasn't going to be the case anyway. So I could have stayed out there. But so I then came back. And I'd already delivered some training the previous year, 10-week webinar series that looked at different aspects of non-technical skills and just culture and psychological safety. So I sort of dusted that off, and I got it up and running within about 2 or 3 weeks. So I filled that one, proved the concept, and then that allowed me to run more. So I've run, I think, six sets of those now. The last couple I've run, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. So I run these literally globally. So I've had people from Singapore and Australia come in. So I'll run a morning class that's sort of 9 till sort of 11 o'clock that covers out Far Eastern Australia. And then I'll run an evening class that covers Europe and the States.
That's brilliant.
So they've been really good. There's a lot of interaction. And I've been really busy in terms of just generally raising the awareness. So running, I'm going to say free webinars. People say, can you give us a presentation? It's like, yeah, fine. No problem at all. I can talk on this for ages, more than you'll give me, put it that way. So it's been a big shift. And what I did find difficult was being in the house and trying to separate personal life and work life. Yeah. And so we had a corner of the study that I basically took over as my space. And one of the first things I did was I bought this sit-stand desk that I'm at the moment. Okay. And one of the reasons for that is because people said when you talk and you present and you stand up, you are far more dynamic and engaging than when you sit down. And it's like, okay, fine. Go for it. And present. So all of the deliveries that I do, I'll do when I'm standing because it's much more easy to engage and much more fluid than sit there and talk like this. And there's a human factors thing straight away of the environment we're in changes how we behave. So then I built my neighbor built the back end of my garage to be the office. So I now basically set it up to be this corner of where we're talking at the moment is my desk space. And then on to my right, I've basically set up a white screen. So, and I've got LED panel light. So I can basically shoot my online materials against a white screen and then just do editing here and here. So it's all at the bottom of the garden in the back of the garage.
That's really, really fascinating because I think many of us have done that. Again, I'm sort of talking from the bottom of the garden as well in a defined space. Though I love the idea of having a stand desk, and maybe I should be doing my podcasting standing up to give me a bit more presence. And as long as I get to my buttons, then I'm all right. How have you found from a personal perspective? Because obviously, I don't know about you, but I found in the first certainly the first 6-7 weeks of it. Almost quite difficult in a way because you're not having the commute home, not having the almost that pressure valve being able to be released in a way that that my family was getting the full brunt of it whenever I had a bad meeting, because that's storm and get a brew, and they're like, how are you? Don't ask, that type of thing. Have you had any issues like that, or have you found it easy? Or
it wasn't too bad. So my wife's a primary school teacher, so she would go to school, and our son would go to school as well. So it wasn't too bad. What I did do was I set up a bike in the garage and used an app called Sufferfest. So I ended up doing, I can't remember, 8,000 kilometers over the year on the bike. And because I'm quite lucky, I live out in the countryside in Malmesbury in Wiltshire, so we're right on the edge of the town. So even if we had something like, the bits where you could go X distance away from home, and I can't remember what the requirements were, we could go out in green space and get fresh air, and it wasn't too bad. Seeing people, criticizing those in the center of big cities of, breaking the rules because, these limitations, it's like being cooped up in a grey box is not good for anybody. And you can see why people are just saying, right, let's go for it. More human factors. So.
No, fair play. It's I was looking after a team whose couple of the members were stuck in sort of first and second floor flats, and that's where because we've got I live in South Wales, and we've got a decent sized garden and places to walk, and it's not until you talk to them sort of people that you think, gosh, yes, just imagine being cooped up in a flat. And they took I remember, because they were saying, we've got 45 minutes and we're going to use them. Do not have a meeting in my 45 minutes. So no, it's fascinating. Right, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to dive into, we'll stop using that joke at some point, but we'll dive into diving.
You are listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. We wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you for your support. You can help further by rating us through your podcast provider, sharing us through social media, and telling your friends and colleagues. Let's work together in raising awareness of the value in putting users at the center of what we do.
So you've touched on some of this already around how human factors wasn't being applied in diving at all. So how do you apply it? What are you applying? How are you actually taking human factors principles and putting them into the sport of diving?
So the bits that, and I'm very careful to talk about the fact that human factors is way bigger than I deal with. I predominantly talk about non-technical skills in terms of team development, and understanding, communication, situation awareness, decision making, the teamwork, leadership, followership piece, and the error-producing conditions or performance-shaping factors. What is it that's more like, make people more likely to make an error or a bad decision, and try to counter those. But I do look at things like checklist design, which, people go, right, checklists, there's the panacea to stop accidents from happening. It's like, no, actually, you could be in a situation where you're making things worse because you've created a checklist that's not really based on human factors principles. Yeah. It's about liability limitation. And if you end up saying to somebody, right, you've got 3 or 4 sides of A4 to complete as your checklist, it ain't going to happen. Yeah. And then when something goes wrong, there's a double bind situation. Well, they went wrong and they didn't follow the checklist, therefore it's their fault. Or if they did fill the checklist in, well, they can't have executed the items in the checklist, therefore it's still their fault. So it's a really difficult thing. So one of the biggest areas that I talk about in human factors is how errors occur, and don't stop at human error. So there's a very basic level of education needed to talk about error likely conditions, the sorts of different performance modes people have, how attention works, how communication works. So the majority of my human factor stuff is based around non-technical skills. Now, herein lies one of the challenges in that because of communication. Now, in diving, we have recreational diving and we have technical diving. And the general boundary is that in recreational diving, you can ascend straight to the surface without any wreck or cave or a decompression obligation. So you've got to stay down. Yeah. Technical diving is where you start doing things where you can't ascend straight to the surface. And there's a lot more risks involved. You've got to solve problems at depth. So the first class I ran was called Non-Technical Skills for Diving. And people went, what's that about then? So we're all technical divers and we're going to do non-technical skills. Does that mean you're going to give us a whole bunch of recreational stuff that we're looking at? It's like, oh man, okay. So I know it was wrong at the time, but there is a point where you can't fall on your sword straight away. So it was like human factors in diving or human factor skills in diving. And then I'm gradually getting people around to the language now that says, actually, human factors is a big bubble. And non-technical skills, and most of what I do is about the non-technical skills aspects rather than the human factor stuff. But in terms of design, hardware, testing, things like that, I will give advice to people and say, here's the books. Yeah. But I'm not the specialist in terms of how to do a hierarchical task analysis or a cognitive task analysis. I know about them. Yeah. I could probably find some stuff out about them. But that's one of the problems of human factors. It's such a huge topic. But it is really interesting to see how you're taking all them skills and applying them to this area. I mean, you said about the difference between recreational and technical diving. Presumably there's a broad range of users as well, because you do have recreational users no matter how they're doing it. But the military have divers, police have divers, and these type of things. So presumably there's a bit of a difference as well between whether you're doing it for fun or you're doing it for your job as well. Oh, totally. So even in the sports area, you can have volunteer divers. So the British Sub-Aqua Club, Sub-Aqua Association, Scottish Sub-Aqua Club are club-based environments where there is no compensation, there's no money changes hands. Then you have professional divers, albeit in the sports industry. Okay. So even within the recreational space, you've got different types of diving. And then you go to the military, and I've been involved in 2 fatality inquiries as a human factors specialist, looking at how do you increase or improve system safety, one in the UK and one overseas. And when you start looking at work as imagined and work as done, you can have those conversations and say, right, what does work really look like? And as a consultant coming in, they'll tell you what really goes on. Yeah. Whereas inside the chain of command, they won't talk about, the stuff that has to get done, because here's all the regulations. And you go, well, how easy is it to follow those? Oh, just a nightmare. They end up eroding our time. And listening to Drew Ray and David Proven's Safety at Work podcast this morning, talking about safety clutter, exactly that. So in the military environment, it's different. I've done a little bit of work with the police, down in Bristol, gave a sort of presentation to them. It's like, oh yeah, it's all really good. Right, this is what we're going to do. And it's really difficult to try and change the mindset or influence the mindset, because you can't change it. You can influence the mindset, look at things differently. And that really is down to the open-mindedness of the leadership within the organizations. And that's difficult.
So are you finding at the moment that you're almost having to knock on the door and say, look, I do this, I can help you? Or have you maybe sort of got towards a bit of a tipping point where people are starting to come to you for help and support?
So the first military task was, I got contacted and said, we'd like you, are you interested in being involved in this study? It's like, yeah, of course I am. I'd love to, I'm passionate about sharing my knowledge, and yes, I can help. The second military task came on the back of the first one, right? Because that was disseminated. And they sort of picked it up and went, oh, well, we can just score out that and put our organization in, because the issues are very similar. I'm still having to go out there, and I'm trying to get into, the commercial diving sector. I've done some work in the topside oil and gas sector with the well operations crew resource management programs, trying to field those. But in the diving sector, that comes under IMCA or the Canadian programs, there isn't any high-level impetus to make it happen. So I've been trying to approach individuals who I know who are influential to say, here, read this, because I think it needs to be considered. And then the normal pushback is, we've got human factor specialists. We cover all that. And yet when I go and speak to commercial divers, and I've got two that are on the conference, they're going, no, they don't. It's the same as any other industry, I suppose. At the high level, they go, we're covering this. And then when you get down to the sort of the tactical and operational levels, they go, we have heard nothing about this. And we could really do with it. So
you're trying to really inspire a change of culture as well as the nitty gritty of that tactical level as well. So don't envy you on that. But obviously, part of this journey then is this conference. So not only have you dived into a niche area, you're going to tell everybody else about it as well. So first of all, what is the conference and when is it?
Yeah, so it's on the 24th and 25th of September. It's being run virtually. It's from 10 o'clock until 10 o'clock on the Friday, 6 o'clock on the Friday, and then 10 o'clock until 6 o'clock on the Saturday. Yeah. And I purposely split it Friday, Saturday, because I know people working, they also want to go diving, and there's all sorts of bits that run. It's running virtually because I'm pretty confident I wouldn't be able to get people to travel into the UK, even if COVID was not on and we weren't in this situation, to be able to do that. And it also allows me to get a global audience. And I've set the times up so that the speakers who are coming in from Australia and New Zealand are in the morning, and as the sun travels around the world and the clock moves, then actually we're going to get speakers from Europe and the States giving their stuff as well. And it's to cover all sorts of diving, predominantly sports recreational diving, but I've got commercial divers. In the States, they have a thing called public safety diving. So their police and fire teams get involved in rescues and recoveries. So I've got a presentation from there. I've got a commander from the Norwegian Navy who's talking about how they brought crew resource management into their dive school. Okay. And I've got Diane Chadwick-Jones, who used to be at BP, talking about changing moving from a blaming to a learning culture in a high-risk organization. And she took over as a sort of head of safety culture within BP following Deepwater Horizon. And she's been a fantastic supporter of the work I'm doing. Fantastic. We've also got people from healthcare talking about how do they bring human factors into healthcare and what can the diving industry learn about that. So it's a very broad and deep session over 28 presentations over the 2 days.
I mean, that's a fantastic amount of content. What was it like trying to go out and get people to come and talk to this? Did they think you were slightly nuts, or were they really keen? Or
it's really good. I have, I suppose, a tribe that's out there. Yeah. Nearly all of the people that are speaking have done courses with me. If they haven't, they know about me over the last sort of 10 years, the work that I've been doing, and very supportive of it. So actually I wrote to, I think, about 36 people for 28 speaking slots, 30 speaking slots. And I filled them all bar one, which somebody I was trying to get in from the States, the US Parachute Association, of how they changed their culture on drop zones. And he was unable to do it. So I'm going to take that slot and just talk about the messy world of diving. Diving is imagined and diving is done. Yeah. And pick up some research that I've done recently. So it was the same as putting the book together. I wrote to 45 people, and got 35 stories back. Because people recognize the value of what I'm doing, and I wasn't going to tear them apart. I wasn't going to be the sort of Monday morning quarterback people who sit there at their story and go, oh, you made that mistake, you made that mistake. Yeah. I took the story apart in terms of human factors and decision-making and cognitive processes and things, and said, this is how it made sense for those individuals to do what they did. Oh, right. So, yeah. That's
brilliant. And then, so you've taken the COVID as an advantage then to have these online conferences, because they are, when we first talked about having the ergonomics conference as virtual, I remember sitting in the last physical meeting. In fact, it was the last physical meeting I sat in, when we were talking as part of the council to sort of say, oh, it might go virtual. And I was like, this is going to be a disaster. This is, nobody's going to do it. It's going to be really rubbish. But again, brilliant to be proved wrong, and have that sort of thing. So, how long has it taken you to pull this conference together? Given massive number of speakers and pulling people on a weekend as well into a virtual environment.
Well, I announced it on the 28th of June, and I probably made a decision 2 weeks before that. So I'd...
Okay, fair enough.
Exactly. I'm using a novel platform as well called Let's Go Live.
Okay.
So one of the things that I wanted to do, it's not a traditional conference platform. It's a virtual social platform. And the idea is there's no chat. Everybody is there with video and mic, which can be on and off. But you're at tables in a hall. Okay. And the idea is you can have 6 to 8 people at a table. And so you're arranged there, and then you can see the presenter screen. So you can talk to each other whilst the main presentation is going on. So you can have the interactions. There's a table that says, I have a question. So people go up to that, and then you get invited up onto the stage.
Cool.
And you can get up and walk from your table onto somebody else's, or there might be some other couches around the room, or you can get up out of this hall and walk into the other hall and sit down and listen to another session. And the other advantage is that it's all going to be recorded.
Yeah.
All of the previous conferences, they've been very reticent, physical face-to-face conferences, have been reticent to record them because they said, well, people won't come then. If they can just get the stuff online, they won't come. It's like, well, there are lots of people that will offset that, who will, get the recordings that they wouldn't do because they can't travel. So there are a number of options. There's a live plus recording, and a recording only option, because I know that it's 8 hours a day over 2 days, and it's, split over the time zones around the world. So it's going to have to be recorded. So you make a decision, and you go, right, I'm going to make it happen. And it's going to be fun. It will happen. It may not break even, but hey, that's the way things go. It's about getting the concept out there. And my whole passion is get the concept of human factors into diving out there globally. It will be a grassroots, and has been a grassroots approach, because organizationally, there isn't much benefit for applying human factors because of the way that the industry is set up. Yeah. The margins are incredibly small. Risk is managed by the number of seriously injured or dead people. Unfortunately, there aren't very many of those. Therefore, what must be happening is safe. Yeah. And you don't understand the margins that divers and dive instructors and dive centers are managing. That's those safety margins, because we don't have a just culture, we don't have a reporting culture, we don't have a learning culture. So it is a huge ecosystem, a whole system of looking at diving.
So the whole, we don't know really how risky it is because, because we're not asking the right questions, we're not doing the right things at the moment. So that's really cool. So if people want to attend, I'm presuming there's still some tickets left.
Oh yeah, there's still tickets left. The URL, if you Google Human Factors in Diving Conference, you'll get it.
Yeah.
But the direct URL is hf-in-diving-conference.com.
Brilliant. I'll make sure that is in this program description, and also on the links that we send out. So that's really, really cool. It'll also be really interesting to have a chat with you after the conference as well, to see how it's gone, and because I think, as well as the content of what you're doing, I think more people are becoming aware that they can set up their own pedestal for their own topic, and actually understanding how easy it is to do certain things. That's one of the reasons I started the podcast, was because I felt I wanted to raise the profile of, the whole thing. And what you've done is really encapsulate that and go big guns on it. So, yeah, I'm hugely jealous.
Well, it came on the back of a Human Factors in Vet Medicine conference that happened at the end of January, start of February.
Right.
So that's when I've been thinking about it. And then there was this bit of, yeah, that's interesting. Maybe I should do something. And then I sat on my bum for ages and didn't do it. So it wasn't until, yes, there had been a seed sowed in sort of January, February, but it wasn't until June that I went, right, make it happen. And
see, I normally have them sort of ideas when I'm sort of sat around, and then my wife berates me for saying, do you not think you're busy enough already? But from what you said, you're quite a busy guy, and you've been able to pull this together. So that is absolutely fantastic work. Like I said, we'll promote the event as much as we can. Best of luck with it. I hope it really goes well, and I look forward to seeing how people receive it. Yeah,
brilliant. And I can give you a quick update afterwards and we go from there. So thank you very much for the time, Barry, and the voice. And if anybody is interested in human factors, you can do it. It takes just that mindset and the drive to say, what can I do differently? So go for it.
Couldn't put it better myself. See you soon.
Thank you for listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. Please do get in touch with your thoughts, questions, and comments. You can contact us at www.barrykirby.co.uk and on Twitter at @BAZ_K. See you next time. And remember, it's more than just common sense.
Thank you for listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. Please do get in touch with your thoughts, questions, and comments. You can contact us on social media such as Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook at 1202 Podcast. See you next time. And remember, it's more than just common sense.